Great state of Iowa. It is the Simon Conway Show. I'm really excited to welcome to the studio Mike Farris, because if you know anything about the overturning of Roe, then you should know his name. Hi, Mike.
Simon, it's great to be with you today. Thank you so much.
And what I wanted to be the first thing I said to you ended up happening about 5 minutes later. Thank you, sincerely.
Well, I had the privilege of being the president of Alliance Defending Freedom, where we were co-counsel with Mississippi on the Dobbs case, and we were able to help them. I do want to give credit to Lynn Fitch, the Attorney General of Mississippi, who made the decision to swing for the fences. Mm-hmm. There was a possibility of, going halfway, but she decided the best way to win the case and defend Mississippi's law was to swing for the fences and say Roe was wrong from the beginning. We helped her all along the way, so we were co-counsel in that case, and it was a thrill of my life to have any role whatsoever in overturning Roe, but it was great to be on that team.
Well, even Justice Ginsburg knew sooner or later it was going to be overturned because it was just such a terrible decision.
It was wrong from the get-go. It was, judicial legislation. They made it up. I mean, I Googled one time, the Supreme Court legalized abortion, in quotes, and the New York Times said that, the Washington Post said that. The court's not supposed to legalize anything.
Right.
It's the legislatures or, Congress could theoretically, but no, they actually acted like a legislature. Even the phrase itself tells us that it was wrong from the beginning.
Yep. I mean, you come to Iowa on a day when the Democrats in our state house, who have no chance of getting this passed, I'm not trying to scare my audience, want to enshrine baby killing in the Iowa Constitution. I always call it baby killing because that's what it is.
It is.
I'm very direct. I'm not a shock jock, but that's what it is. And if you give it this nice clinical term, abortion, people actually don't understand. At the end of an abortion, there's a dead baby.
Yeah, I was up at the Iowa State House today and saw their pink-shirted protesters. I used some discretion and didn't go around and tell each of them that I was on the Dobbs legal team. So I didn't want to be clawed to death.
No, that's probably wise. Yeah. All right, look, apart from what you did, we're talking about Dobbs because there's something else that you're involved with now, which is the Convention of the States. I'm a big fan of Convention of the States. I also personally don't believe it'll ever happen, have to tell you, cards on the table. But then again, there's a lot of people that never thought Dobbs would happen.
That's
so
right.
Here we are.
Here we are.
And there's a connection.
There is. After Roe versus Wade, 19 states passed Convention of the States applications to hold a convention for the purposes of protecting the right to life, to reverse Roe. And unfortunately, what happened was that Chief Justice Warren Burger became friends with Phyllis Schlafly during this period of time.
Yep.
And they were on the bicentennial of the Constitution Committee together. And Warren Burger convinced Phyllis that if there was ever a convention called under Article 5, it would run away. And he convinced her that would happen. And so Phyllis led the efforts to repeal 6 of these applications. So we went from 19 states to 13 states. And more importantly, the political momentum died because we're going in the wrong direction. So if Warren Burger had not convinced her of this lie, it's a lie. I mean, he was the co-author of Roe versus Wade, so you can figure out his motive pretty easily.
Right.
And so he was trying to get a respected, wonderful woman. I mean, I knew Phyllis personally. I litigated the ERA case when they tried to extend the ratification deadline from 7 years to basically 10 and a half years.
Okay.
And so I got to know Phyllis. I loved the woman. She was just wrong on this one, and she was misled by Warren Burger. And unfortunately, there are people who are continuing to say that same line. It's the Warren Burger line. It's going to be a runaway. And they say instead, no, we don't need to do this. Instead, let's have nullification, which is just, unfortunately, historically inaccurate. They don't understand what they're talking about. And it's an inept weapon, period. The way I like to explain nullification, if one state could overturn a law of the federal government and say it's unconstitutional, we're not going to follow it, California would look at the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that I helped write, and they would say, we think that it's unconstitutional. So Hobby Lobby, you won your case in the Supreme Court on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. We're going to nullify it. Yeah. And if you're going to operate your Hobby Lobby stores in California, you're going to have to pay abortion insurance premiums in our state. You let the feds say what they want to say. That's nullification in action. And it doesn't work that way. It was never intended. And James Madison has made that very clear, even though they like to quote a couple of sentences from James Madison to torture his meaning into something that was never intended.
We're in studio with Mike Farris. He is from the Alliance Defending Freedom and was a big part of the Dobbs case. And look, you just talked about this line that gets repeated. Somebody in Iowa that keeps repeating it is National Committee woman for the Republicans. That would be Tamara Scott.
Tamara and I have known each other for a long time, and like Phyllis, I think she's a good woman, and we would agree on almost everything. But unfortunately, Tamara has agreed with the same story that Phyllis agreed with. She's was, I'm sure, associated with Phyllis. I don't know that how detailed it was, but it's the same argument from Warren Burger that you hear time and time again from her lips and from her associates' lips. Right. And it's unfortunate, and it's not true historically. They basically look at the Alien Sedition Acts from 1790s that John Adams was responsible for, clearly unconstitutional, especially the sedition part, which is about can't criticize the government. But and the Virginia legislature and the Kentucky legislature followed suit and said these laws are unconstitutional, and they used the word nullification in a sentence to describe that. Madison then expanded on the meaning of that in a resolution in the Virginia legislature in 1800, and then further in a detailed letter answering what does nullification mean. And he basically said it's a protest. It's not one state declaring the law to be unconstitutional in a legally operative sense. Okay. He said there has to be a national law. And he said the only solution to this, however, is to use Article 5 to get the states to change and clarify if they violated the Constitution. Let's clarify it and use Article 5. That's how the states can effectively overturn things, and not through something called nullification.
So the scaremongering that I hear, and it is scaremongering, is, well, they could have this convention of the states and it could be in there for term limits, right? That's so many people want term limits, and turkeys never vote for Thanksgiving. Right. So maybe that's the only way we ever get term limits. And the outright lie that I hear is, they could abolish the Second Amendment while they're there.
Right. Well,
that specific thing is said to my face.
I've heard that 100 times. Now, first of all, the argument usually is that the original Constitutional Convention was a runaway. Yep. And so why isn't this also going to be a runaway? If people want to Google my last name, Farris, Farris, and the words defying conventional wisdom, they can read the article that I published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy that proves definitively that the Constitutional Convention was not a runaway. It's a lie. It's a historical lie made by people who want to undermine the Constitution. And just think about it. Why do you call yourself a constitutionalist and then think it's illegally adopted? If they're right, we shouldn't be operating under the Constitution. Right. But a constitutionalist should want to believe that it's legally adopted, and the history of the situation proves that that's right. That the truth is they followed their instructions properly, because their instructions didn't come from the Articles of Confederation Congress, like these people argue. They came from the individual states. And what the states said, 10 of them used this exact phrase, to render the federal Constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. That's why they were called, not solely to amend the Articles. That was an endorsement resolution by Congress, had the same legal effect as National Pickle Week. They were just saying what we think you guys should do. And well, thank you, Congress. That's your opinion's nice. But only one state put that in their instructions to their delegates, and that was New York. And they obeyed it, because when it became clear they were going to write a new document, 2 delegates from New York left, and the New York instructions said, once if not all 3 are there, New York can't vote. Alexander Hamilton was at the convention. He never voted again. He debated, never voted, because they followed their instructions. There's no runaway. That's a lie. And besides all that, 38 states have to ratify. Right. And so if 13 states vote no, or even don't vote, because 38 states have to ratify, nothing crazy can get through that system. Right. It's hard to do something good, but it's something crazy is absolutely, utterly impossible.
Why do we have so many people here in Iowa? We've got, as I say, Tamara Scott is the flag bearer for there should be no convention. It's in the it's Article 5. It's right there.
Yeah.
The founders knew, I believe, that the dangers of this republic might come to fruition, whereby we, the people, needed to have a device, a mechanism, where we could, in fact, change things.
Well, I can show you in Madison's record where they said exactly what you just said. Mm-hmm. George Mason, it was the last week of the convention, stood up on the floor and said, look, someday this government is going to abuse its authority. And when that happens, the method that was in place at that moment was Congress proposes all amendments and the states ratify all amendments. He said Congress will never propose an amendment to limit its own power. And so they knew, and he made a motion to give the states the authority to amend the Constitution so that the states can stop the abuse of power by the federal government. And it was adopted, and it says in the record, nem con, which means no debate. Or, modern day we'd say, like, duh. In their days, they probably said, we hold that truth to be self-evident. And so we clearly know that they did it for the moment we live in. The federal government is abusing its authority, and the states need to have the ability to do something about it. My wife and I have 10 kids, so I know something about raising kids. If you have a child and you raise them till they're 18 and you never discipline them, disciplining a child is setting boundaries for them, ultimately. If you never discipline them, they're a mess. Mm-hmm. And if we never discipline the federal government, never set boundaries for them by the states using that power, we got a mess on our hands. That's exactly what we have. It's bad parenting that we've done, and the state legislatures have the legal authority, and I contend, with that legal authority, have the moral responsibility to act, to discipline the federal government and bring it back into check.
We've been lulled over a period of decades into this full sense of security because, we have 2-year terms in the House because they couldn't get anybody to serve for longer than 2 years, and because they wanted to get back home to the farm, and over the years it's got longer and longer and longer, and now we have career politicians, and the first career politicians didn't do anything too dramatic, and now we live in these crazy times, and they are absolutely crazy. We're almost out of time. We'll talk about the Convention of the States Day, which is coming up in our capital here.
Well, it's going to be next week on
the 28th.
The 28th at noon. Former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum is going to be there, and Rick Green, who's the founder of the Patriot Academy, will be speaking along with Bob Vanderplatz, who is from Family Leader, obviously, and he's endorsed it, and he's going to be speaking there as well. So I would encourage people to come out, and in the meantime, call your senator, call your representative, encourage them to vote for Convention of States.
It's tax season, so I have to just lean on you a little bit for one final unrelated question to any of this. Was the 16th Amendment ever ratified?
I went when I was litigating the constitutionality of the Equal Rights Amendment, whether it was properly adopted or not, in the whether the ratification period being extended was lawful. And in that process, I went and held all the original ratification documents from the 13th Amendment forward in National Archives and held them in my hand. And I think if you apply the normal rule of legislation, it was not.
Woo, there's a case.
But to get somebody to buy it at this day,
yeah, I know, right?
That's not realistic.
Exactly. So basically, income tax, that is the 16th Amendment for those of you that don't want to look it up. Income tax not properly ratified, says Mike Farris.
Yeah, well,
that's great. That's great. Don't take that as reasons not to file, though, ladies and gentlemen.
Correct. Do not do that.
No, do not do that. Absolute honor to meet you. I mean that sincerely. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate you so much.
You actually remind me. We were talking about him earlier on, but you do genuinely remind me of my good friend and former colleague Jan Michelson. You really do in so many ways. He was such a smart man. Well, still is a smart man.
That's not right. I was on his show many times. He was a great man.
Great man. 515-284-1040, 284-1040. The Convention of the States, ladies and gentlemen. We've talked about it numerous times before.